everybody, welcome to Garden Time with Belle. I'm here in my greenhouse this morning because I thought we'd start here so that I could take a little bit of time in the beginning of the video and share with you my tips for growing annuals in pots and containers successfully. Those of you who've seen some of my previous videos, in fact, the one that I published in May on crazy Fertilize and planting out annuals for the summer, you saw how I go about planting most of my annuals in pots. And so if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to encourage you to go back and take a look at it, because that'll give you really some of the before shots of where all of these containers started. What did they look like in May? I'm coming to you from Missouri. I garden in zone 6. And so typically we have quite a long growing season. I start potting up annuals in early May, and they will go all the way until our first hard frost. And where I live, sometimes our first hard frost isn't until the early to mid part of October. So these beautiful flowering annuals need to last several months. And so I want to share today with you all 7 tips that I use and I've used for many, many years to produce containers that really look beautiful and perform all season long, even in my zone where they're growing all of May, June, July, August, and usually all of September. So if you want to get a lot of flower power out of your annuals like I do, let me share with you some tips, and then hang into the video, because after we talk a little bit about how I go about taking care of my annuals that are in containers, we're going to walk around the property and I'm going to actually show you some containers, what they look like here. I guess we're in the first week of August. I want to show you what they're looking like many months later, as well as I'll try to put on the screen actually some pictures from May when I first planted them. So who doesn't love a good before and after when they first went in the pots to the big after here this many months later? So let's get into it. So I want to share with you my 7 tips for growing annuals in pots and containers. So let's start with tip number 1. Right plant, right place. You've heard me talk about this before. That is simply saying, pay attention to what your tag says when you buy those annuals at the nursery, and pay special attention to the light requirements. Does my beautiful flower need full sun, part shade, full shade? Very important to know, so you'll know where you're going to set your container. The beauty of containers, however, is if your flowers aren't producing or your plants aren't doing great in that particular pot or container, it could be they're in the wrong place. So you can lift up that container, usually, unless it's a massive container. If it's massive, be like me and ask your husband to help you relocate it, but move the container. Or sometimes it's just a matter of turning the container a little bit. If you've got it tucked up to a wall and it's getting just sunlight in the front of the container, you might want to rotate your container. So that's tip number 1. All right, tip number 2, good soil. Really and truly invest in good soil for your pots. Don't skip here, because it is true whether you are growing things in a raised garden, in the landscape, in a container, soil quality is so important. That's what feeds your plants. If you put a beautiful plant from the nursery in yucky soil that doesn't drain well, that doesn't have any nutrients in it, it's not going to perform for you, and you've really wasted money. So I can't encourage you enough. I happen to love Pro Mix potting soil, but there's all kinds of great potting soil on the market. But I would say when you go to purchase your soil, spend a little bit more for the better stuff, because your plants will perform better and they'll love you for it. Tip number 3, start small if you can. And by that, I mean, if you've got a plant that you know is really going to fill in and grow and get big, like my favorite Super Tunia Vista series petunias, Don't cram your container or pot full of those, because you know over time they're going to get large. If you don't know, read the tag. The tags will tell you typically how tall and wide a plant will get. So pay close attention to that. The other reason why I'm a huge proponent of not overfilling your containers when you first plant them up is because the soil in there has a better chance of really feeding just a plant or two over the length of a 4-month growing season like I have, versus going to the nursery. And I know you're tempted to do it, and you get a lot of plants and you want immediate impact. You're going to pack that container as full as you can, full of beautiful flowering annuals. However, there's not enough soil in there really to sustain them all year long. A lot of my friends will get these glorious giant hanging baskets in early May, and by the end of June, early July, they're looking sad and tired. Well, the reason why is when you get those containers that are packed full of plants in the beginning of the season, their roots are already very well established. Those are mature plants. So you're taking a really mature plant and trying to stretch it for 4 months. That's going to be very difficult to have that plant, that pot, that container looking beautiful months later. So if you can exercise a little patience like I do, some of the time, just put one plant that you know is going to get enormous in that 14-inch hanging basket. And I'll show you my Sunpatiens in a little bit. And let it grow in over time. You'll be so glad you did. Of course, I appreciate if you are having an event and you need just some flower power, full on, fully developed hanging baskets or pots for, a party that you're having. I get that. I totally get that. Been there, done that. But if you're looking to enjoy gorgeous flowers and plants in your summer garden for months and months, think about starting small if you can. And of course, since your plants are going to be living in containers, tip number 4 is all about water. Water, water, water your plants. Your summer annuals need water. Where I live in mid-Missouri, I am watering my containers at least once a day when it's in the 90s. They require it, and I prefer to water early morning so that soil and those roots can take up all that moisture and hold on to it throughout the day. Some folks will water in the evening as well. The only caveat there is if you're going to water your pots in the evening, I would encourage you to water at the root level. Don't spray the foliage and water over top at night, because the water that gets on your foliage of your plants doesn't have a chance to really evaporate with the heat of the day. And water sitting on foliage is really sometimes a recipe for introducing fungal issues and problems for your plant. So if you do water at night, water at the soil level. Get a nice watering can with a long wand and put it right at the soil level. The other thing I want to mention about any containers, large, small, whatever it is, make sure they have drainage. They have to drain. You need to fill it with water and you need it to drain. Almost every annual that I grow in my mid-Missouri garden, they'll all say that they require proper drainage, well draining soil, and that means your pots need to drain. You do not want your roots of your beautiful plants to be sitting in water. And if you don't have proper drainage, that's exactly what will happen. And actually, a lot of gardeners will say that the majority of plants that die, they die from overwatering versus underwatering. Tip number 5, and this is probably the one I want you to pay the most attention to of my 7 tips, and that is, if you want these beautiful flowering annuals to continue to give you flower power all season long, you must fertilize. You absolutely must feed them. Think about it. You're planting them in early May. You want them to produce and go, go, go for 4 months or more. They can't really continue to put out flowers and put out healthy stems and healthy foliage 3 or 4 months later unless you are feeding them. And I happen to fertilize everything in my garden on Fridays. I call it Fertilizer Friday for a reason. That just helps me remember that's the day I need to fertilize, and especially fertilizing my containers. So I'll give you a little bit more in-depth information on what I use to fertilize my annuals and my pots in just a little bit. So hang in for that. Tip number 6, don't be afraid to prune. Literally prune your container plants. Just because they start out one way doesn't mean you need to just let them go crazy, or if they're not looking great, they can get a haircut. You can go in and prune. Certain things really need to be pruned, certain kinds of flowers like these geraniums. When the blooms are spent, you need to come in and cut off those dead blooms so that energy goes into producing more flowers. There are other kinds of flowers that don't require any kind of pruning or deadheading. But if they're getting enormous, sometimes mid-season, a hard prune will rejuvenate that plant, and it will be like, oh, it's got a little like boost of energy, and it will perform for you. And in fact, when we go around outside and look at my containers, I'll show you where I've already done that for the season. And tip number 7, last but not least, is don't be afraid to relocate your pot or container if it is not performing. You know, gardening is a lot of experimentation, and I don't hesitate if I have a plant or plants in a particular container and they're just not performing well. I'll think about light, I'll think about water, I'll think about fertilizing and all of those things. But then if they still aren't performing, I'll just move the pot to a new location, and I'll show you a great example of that here in just a little bit. So before we head out and take a look at how my containers are doing 4 months later after they were planted, I want to talk a little bit about fertilizers, because I told you earlier in my top 7 tips, that is really one of the most critical aspects of keeping your beautiful containers healthy and beautiful all summer long. So I don't want to get too technical with scientific stuff, but I do think it's confusing as a new gardener. I remember like going, what do these numbers mean? And they said a balanced fertilizer. I didn't understand what that meant. So I thought I'd just take a minute to talk a little bit about the fertilizers I like to use, but also just some general fertilizer knowledge. So when you are purchasing a fertilizer, there are 2 different kinds. There's something that's called water soluble, like this. This is a Proven Winners water soluble plant food. And what that means is that you're going to get this granular fertilizer that you mix with water soluble. And then once you mix it up according to the package directions, you pour that in your pots and give your plants a drink. So water soluble is one kind. And then a lot of other people like to use what we call slow release plant food. And so this, I'll just open this up for you. This is also a Proven Winners continuous release plant food. These are little tiny pellets. I think Osmocote is another brand people really like. But they're little tiny pellets that actually I like to sprinkle this in my containers when I first plant the plants. All right, so I put in my Biotone root starter fertilizer and a little scoop of this in my containers to get them off to a good start. But this is slow release. So it's heat activated. So you've got these little granules in your soil, and every time you water and every time, you know, the sun hits your pot and hits those plants, they can take up a little bit of the fertilizer. The water soluble that I mentioned is what you mix with water, and this is what you add weekly, at the minimum weekly. I guess no, I should say at the minimum every 2 weeks, but really if you can do it weekly, your plants will love you for it. But water soluble, you're giving them a drink with diluted fertilizer, and they take it up immediately. Those roots are like, whoa, this is awesome. It's sort of like the filet mignon of dinners for your plants. So they are loving it when you give them this in their water once a week. So So let me tell you which ones I typically use. So the Proven Winners one, I use this, and then I switch it up and I use Jack's Blossom Booster. So tomorrow I'll probably use this. Tomorrow's Friday, and then next week I'll use Jack's. I just go back and forth, the water soluble. Again, I'm not using the continuous slow release. I use that at planting time. But I want to talk a little bit about the numbers. What in the world do these numbers mean? So any kind of fertilizer, regardless of the brand, should have 3 numbers printed on the container. And they are in a sequence. We call it NPK: nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So what in the heck do those things do for your plants? Well, nitrogen produces leafy growth. So if you have something that's really a ton of foliage, nitrogen, high nitrogen, oh, they love it. Produces leafy growth, really important. The middle number is P for phosphorus. Phosphorus produces healthy roots, flower power, and fruit. So think about things that, of course, your annuals are full of flowers, flowering annuals like petunias. They love lots of phosphorus. But if you think about vegetables, things like tomatoes that set fruit, right? They set a flower and then that turns into a tomato. They love phosphorus. And then the last number represents potassium. Potassium is really for overall health of your plant, for strong and sturdy stems. So that's what the NPK stands for. That's what those numbers stand for. And each fertilizer is a little bit different. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is I also will take this water-soluble fertilizer that I showed you, the granular stuff, and I will stick it in this. I got this sprayer at my local Westlake's hardware store. I just bought this, and I fill this with this water-soluble fertilizer. Fill it with water, and then you can attach your hose to this. So if you are like me, I've got some annuals, big flowering annuals and things in the landscape. I've got it in some of my beds with perennials and things like that. And if I have a lot of things to fertilize, rather than me having to fill my watering can over and over again to feed them on Fridays, I will hook this up to the hose. The water goes through here. It draws up the fertilizer and sprays it out, and I'll just spray them. So enough talking. It's time for me to grab the camera. I'll turn it around and let's take a walkabout and look at my containers and pots that I started. It would be 3 full months ago. So the first week of May is when I potted up most of these. And now here we are, the first week of August. So they have been performing their little heads off for 3 full months. So let's go take a look. So here I am in front of my greenhouse, going to show you these beautiful Aquapot light containers. But before I do, I just have to say, it is an absolute glorious weather day here. We finally got some cloud cover. Gosh, it's the last couple of weeks, it's been terribly hot and humid here. I mean, heat index is 105. It's just been, it's been really not so much fun to garden, but oh my gosh. The next 3 or 4 or 5 days, it's just low humidity and high in the low 80s. We are making the most of it. So anyhow, so let me turn the camera around and show you 2 of my big, beautiful containers. Okay, aren't they just beautiful? Let's get a little close-up look here so you can see that these large Aquapot light self-watering containers are just doing fabulous for me. I've got 3 different types of Supertunia mini vistas in here. I've got violet star, indigo, and white. And interesting, the violet star are the big performers. I mean, look over here. The violet stars are the striped ones. They are growing up into the Gara. You know, I mentioned to you all earlier that It's okay to prune your plants when they're getting really big and bushy, to do a rejuvenation prune. And I did. Actually, I guess it's been a week ago. I came in and these were down to about right here. I just went around with my pruners and I trimmed those up. And I also trimmed my Gara. My Gara had sort of slowed down. It wasn't blooming these gorgeous, fluttery little white flowers. There weren't very many flowers on those a week ago. So I came in, they were about this tall, and I just gave it a mounding trim. And now you can see that rejuvenated that plant. Yeah, and then I've got, of course, a couple of pots with some Supertunia Vista. Oh my gosh. I'll look it up and put it on the screen. It's super popular. Anyways, okay, I mean, those are some beautiful containers. So on either side of the garage, I've got these. These are also self-watering containers. I just use self-watering containers whenever I can for my really big pots. And look at the coleus here. Isn't that just beautiful? Coleus and the double up pink begonia. Two beautiful proven winter plants. So I'm really happy with how those turned out. And then real quick, I'm just going to pan over here to this area and show you this pot. This is Diamond Frost Euphorbia, and it likes it here. I actually ended up moving this pot because I had another one that died. Honestly, they were in the same location, same everything, and sometimes that just happens. The other one bit the dust, so I repotted this one and I just plopped it right there, and it is loving life. Let me just show you real quick while we're over here. These aren't pots or containers, but these are some Supertunias in the ground, and this is where I use my sprayer. I mentioned to you all before, the handheld sprayer that I hook onto my hose to fertilize annuals that are in the ground. Here we are coming around the front of the house so I can show you all the two unique stone concrete containers that I have on either side of the front door, and they are performing beautifully. Let me turn the camera around for you. So these Sweet Carolina sweet potato vine Medusa is the variety, have gotten so large you can't even see the container, but they are loving life here. This is west facing front porch, but there's such an overhang that I can't even get under here to show you. There's the container. Can you see it in there? But actually, these Sweet Potato Caroline Medusa variety are doing just what I wanted them to. I planted them here so that they would spill over. But I do think, like I said, don't be afraid to prune or cut on your annuals. And so I think maybe I'm going to come in here where my finger is and I'm going to cut off about this much so I can see at least the pedestal, the base of my beautiful concrete urns. And then I have grown these gorgeous dragon wing begonia in this spot for years. They just are stellar. They love it here. So if I were to pan around and show you, let me go up a little bit. So they're shaded because, you know, this is a deep front porch. They're shaded the majority of the day, but they do get a little bit of sun when the sun is really low in the ground, low in the sky at the end of the day. But this is one of my favorite places to sit and sip my morning coffee. So here we are at the back of the house, and I want to show you this container. This is one of those Aquapot light containers. It's a big container, as you can see. The same kind of containers I have over there in front of my greenhouse that I just showed you. But this one has some geranium that I grew from seed. It has a purple fountain grass, and it has some of this ivy. Those of you that follow my channel got to recently see me pop in that ivy. I needed a trailer, and I'd say it is a happy camper in this spot. Again, When I have really big pots, if I can use self-watering pots, I do, but I still, because fertilizing is important, I still come out and fertilize these big pots once a week. And then, dun, da, da, da. Back in May, you saw me plant 3 coleus in this pot, and they have gotten enormous. I don't know if I can express to you how big this pot is. This pot is on drip. So you see this perennial bed here. I connected into the drip, and so this gets watered every other day. Sometimes I have to water it by hand because it's so enormous. Yeah, let me see if I can turn the camera around so you can just see how huge this pot is, and they are just lovely. Okay, so I don't know if this is going to work, but I just want you to see how enormous, I'm going to get down on my knees, how enormous this is. Like, this pot, it is humongous, and it loves it here. This is east facing, so remember, right place, right plant, right place. And so, yeah, it gets morning sun and then afternoon shade, and it's loving life. This is also, I just showed you, this is east facing, but because it's way out here away from the house, it gets much more sun throughout the day. So, but it does get a break in the afternoon, which I think it appreciates. All right, so it's time to go up on the deck and show you a few last pots and containers and see how they are performing 3 months later. Let's just start with just the wowzer. I mean, come on, you guys. If you are not growing Supertunia Vista series of petunias by Proven Winners, you are missing out. Oh my gosh, this is Jazzberry. And let's pan over here, and there's the Jazzberry twin. You cannot even see the 14-inch pot, can you? Yeah, and this is just one plant. And because I've grown this plant and I read the tags, we know that they get enormous. And so that's all that pot needed. It's one little plant to give you such gorgeous flower power. I just can't even express how wonderful these plants are. All right, let's take a look at these 2 little pots that are out here on the deck. And this is a good example of, don't be afraid to relocate your pots if your plants aren't doing well. So these are considered Sunpatiens. They actually aren't flowering at the moment, but their flowers are the same color as the beautiful Vista Jazzberry. And anyhow, just the story behind these, they used to be inside on my screened-in covered porch, and they looked great when I potted them up. For the first month, they had tons of flowers and were absolutely spectacular. In fact, I'll see if I can find a picture and put it on the screen of how beautiful they were. But then they stopped flowering. Then they started looking kind of yucky and scraggly. And so I thought, I don't know that I think they might not be getting enough sun. And so I popped them out here, and actually they are looking so much better. So don't be afraid to relocate your pots. And here are the electric lime coleus. You all saw me pot these up just 3 months ago. And again, they are in, I don't know if you can tell, let me get in here, 3 different pots, 1 plant in each pot. And what's so interesting is the idea that sometimes a plant will grow based on the size of the pot. So in the smaller pot, it's a smaller plant. This right here is just 1 plant, but because it's in the biggest pot, it is enormous. One thing I might mention to you about coleus, a good idea, a good practice, is when they start to flower. You see the flowers here? When they start to do that, it's a good idea to pull off the flowers. And then what will happen is you'll encourage it to put its energy into branching and bushing out. Now, for some people, this might seem too bushy, so you could certainly come in and trim this up a little bit, because sometimes when coleus gets really tall and all that beautiful foliage can get heavy, and in a big windstorm, sometimes coleus can snap. So you could keep it much more tidy, but I kind of like that wild and woolly look. So the last stop on our tour of potted plants are these lovely Caladium. I recently showed you a video of me filling this pot up. I've never grown Caladium before. There are 3 different varieties. These are the proven winners, heart to heart variety of Caladium, and I just am enjoying their beauty so much. So that's going to do it for today's video. We took some time to talk about 7 tips that I use when growing summer annuals in pots and containers. I had a lot of fun showing you how things are doing here. Gosh, they've grown all of May, June, and all of July. So these babies have been going for 3 months. And fingers crossed, they're going to continue to look this beautiful for at least another month, if not 2 months, before our first frost. Thank you all so much for supporting my channel and hanging out with me on these videos. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing so that I can continue to bring more content to gardeners like you.